business agenda for the nation. So you have heard him talk about India after 75. So now this session is all about India after 75, the business agenda. May I now request the moderator of our session, Dr. Rupali Basu, MD and CEO of Woodlands Multi-Speciality Hospital Limited, and chairperson of our lifestyle committee, to please take a seat on the dais. Thank you, ma'am. We also have with us, ladies and gentlemen, our expert speaker and guest of honor for today's annual general meeting. May I request Mr. Ashwini Kumar Tiwari, Managing Director, International Banking, Technology and Subsidiaries, State Bank of India, our special AGM speaker on the subject. Thank you, sir. We are also privileged to have with us, joining online, Mr. Samir Satpathy, Divisional CEO, Personal Care Products, ITC Limited, as our panelist. And along with Mr. Satpathy, we are privileged to have with us online Mr. Sanjeev Krishan, Chairman, PwC in India, who's unfortunately, he was almost, scared, sort of to touch down to Kolkata this morning, but, his plans got delayed. So he'll be coming here this evening, I think. But he's joining us from Mumbai, I believe, sir. And he will be the second panelist to join with Mr. Satpathy online. We shall have the expert address from Mr. Ashwini Tiwari to commence the session with. And thereafter, we shall have the perspectives of our other panelists. With this, may I request Dr. Rupali Basu to please take the session forward, ma'am.
Good afternoon, everyone. So we have the panel discussion on India after 75, the business agenda. We'll talk about the sectors. I'll initially request Mr. Kumar to give his address from the banking sector. He's representing the largest bank in the country, the State Bank of India. So I would request you to give your thoughts at this moment, and then we'll take the panel discussion forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Basu. Good afternoon, everyone. When I flew from Mumbai, it was raining, and I was hoping that I'll see some sun here in Kolkata. It seems it was raining even better than what it was in Mumbai. So you are doing better than Mumbai in this respect. The topic of today, India at 75, is very interesting. And when I was given this topic, there was a panel. So typically in a panel, you really don't prepare too much. You think the moderator is going to ask questions, you just respond to those questions. And when I landed here and I came here, then Arnab told me, we'll have an address from you as well. I said, okay. So that's being really agile. We talk about agile working these days. So that's what it is. And I was very happy to hear Mr. Mukherjee's talk about the green vision for Kolkata and the industrial sector of Kolkata, and the participation in COP26 at Glasgow. So that's a real honor. And I would say that many in Glasgow may not know, but Calcutta has been green in transport with trams long back. I mean, unfortunately, that got stopped, should have continued. And today there should have been a model for green development as well. So coming back to the topic, I would just like for some people like me, I don't know how many in the audience are the child of 70s, if you will, and who have seen that time of the pre-liberalization economy, if you will, when we had so much time on our hands, no mobiles, no cable TVs. We had an event when we used to go to movies, etc., because you had to really prepare for going there. And of course, telephone and all were tough to have. I mean, maybe amongst the neighborhood, one family would have, and people would actually give that family's number. No concert of PP, it was all considered a neighborhood telephone for everyone. So that is the time we have seen. And I mean, myself, I've stood in queues to get the kerosene oil, if you will. Even in middle class families, it was considered okay to go and stand in queues to get sugar and all. From there, we have come here. So if you just have that as a comparison point, you will see how much we have progressed. I mean, we always have the lens of criticism for most things, especially, and we think that we are nowhere, we are not developed. No, please recall what we were and how we had. I mean, I remember my dad, who used to work in a central government organization, fairly well paid considering the time then. He booked his scooter from Jammu. This was a Bajaj Chetak scooter. It took 11 years for that scooter to materialize. And I can't imagine today that this could be a scenario when things would be available on tap. And just to set the context, I started my career in West Bengal. I joined the Steel Authority of India as a management trainee technical, and I worked on the shop floor for 2 years, a shop called conditioning shop in Alloy Steel plant. And I am not sure how this plant is doing today. SAIL is an important customer, and someday I do hope to go back to that plant and see how it is going today. But from there, and I appeared for my SBI interview right here, I think Jeevandeep building, which is close by, I guess, from here. So I have very fond memories, haven't still forgotten some elements of Bengali, if you will. So that's the context. But from a banking perspective, from an economic perspective, I'll just summarize. All of this is known. But what we see today is the post-pandemic. And again, pandemic, I would like to just take you back 100 years. 1918, the Spanish flu was the earlier pandemic. There have been H1N1, all of these classified as pandemic by WHO's definitions, but they were not pandemics in the real sense. 1918 Spanish flu was a real pandemic in the real global sense of the word. In fact, it killed almost 5 million people or 50 lakh in India. It is a part of history not very well known because it's not documented. I mean, you'll find it difficult to find any references of that pandemic effect in India. You hear about World War I and the Indian soldiers' participation, which is now getting recognized. You hear about the Jallianwala Bagh incident. Sandwiched between these two was this pandemic, which came to India through the soldiers of World War I. And you have references of this pandemic in the writings of Suryakant Tripathi Nirala. I don't know how many of you recognize. He's a great Hindi poet. He lost his entire family in this pandemic. And that is those kind of references indirect, because it was so traumatic. So many people were killed. Nobody wanted to talk about it. Same in Western culture. In American culture, in Western culture, you find lesser references. You have very few books on this because these kind of pandemics are so traumatic. They kill so many people. Nobody wants to talk about them. You want to talk about good things. You want to remember good things, not things like these. And yet in this pandemic, what we have seen is in just 6 months flat, we came up with a vaccine. And this vaccine today, I mean, after 1.5 years of the pandemic, it is coming across the world. India is a leader in vaccines. 50% of the vaccine production in the world is from India. And after we have taken care of ourselves, we had a lot of challenges. And then suddenly we have scaled up. Nobody believed that we can scale up, but we have. And by December, hopefully, the target which was set initially of vaccinating at least 60% and all will be done. So this is the main driver. In today's times, after all the GDP, which has gone down and all, and mind us that despite 20%, 10%, whatever growth numbers you should see this year, at the end of this year, we'll still be behind the 2019 numbers. So that's a big thing, because in India, each basis point of a GDP means so many jobs, so much wealth, so much income for so many people, because it's an aggregation of all the incomes. So therefore, it's a big hit, especially to the informal economy, the MSMEs, the people who survived on a daily basis. Now, that is a challenge we have. The top corporates, mind you, have not suffered. And I say this from the bank's perspective. We see people paying down our loans, actually, rather than taking more loans. The corporate credit growth for us last year was minus 1%. Overall growth was positive, largely because a lot of retail growth. And this retail growth had a lot of gold loan growth, a lot of personal loan growth, which tells you the kind of pain, because people have run down their savings and now they are borrowing. Gold loan is not a loan which is easily popular in many parts of the country, except perhaps the South. People take it only as a last resort. So if this loan is going up significantly, while good for the business in one sense, but it is a sign also of the pain which the normal people are having. So therefore, while these personal loans and the household indebtedness goes up, the top corporates were not borrowing. They were actually paying down, especially the steel sector, which was doing very well. So therefore, what we see today is a very lopsided picture. Top corporates are doing extremely well. I mean, you see the corporate credit, the corporate profits have grown significantly. Whereas the MSMEs are struggling, and because of the emergency line, which a lot of MSMEs have got, they have been able to survive. And therefore, the government has extended this. And we hope that the supply chain finance, which is the next big thing, should be able to take care of some of these MSMEs. But this chamber, if it has large companies as members, I would like to know more about it. I think should support MSMEs, as Mr. Jindal was also saying, because these are the bread and butter. The other things which we see from a bank's perspective is the the large amounts of private equity which is coming in. So whereas on the one side, the bank credit growth overall was 6% last year, and in which the personal credit growth, which is the individual mortgages, the personal loans, etc., grew at about 15%. The corporate credit growth was, as I said, either negative or flat. So therefore, where is this money going to the technical side, the manufacturing units? It's all coming from private equity. The private equity flows have been significant, and not only going into fintechs, they were going into real world companies like Delivery, which is a logistics company, companies like Toys company. I mean, we wouldn't even think that these are the companies which will attract private equity, but they are. And at State Bank of India, we have a private equity company, a small company, which is investing into funds, MSME funds, green, sustainable funds. So I think we have a long way ahead of us to actually accumulate this, strengthen this trend of startups. And the Indian startup system today is the second best in the world. People talk about Silicon Valley. I would argue that there are in India, at least there are 4 or 5 clusters of Silicon Valley. Bangalore is not the only way. Today you have Noida, you have Gurgaon, you have maybe Hyderabad, so many centers where startups are blooming. Every day I get about 5 or 6 proposals from startups saying that would State Bank care to give us a platform so that we can use your data, or would you invest in us? And as a bank, actually, we haven't found a way to invest because these are loss-making entities to begin with. They don't, we have to have a equity investment. So with all of this going, we are trying to find a way to invest into this. And finally, on technology is, you hear about it all the time, how crucial technology is to everything, including into financial industry. We have, some of you might have heard about it. It is an app where we say we combine everything, you need only one. Now, in this app, we have created digital journeys which are end-to-end. So we have a personal loan product, which is called PAPL. Just 3 clicks, a customer gets money into his account. Similarly, a business loan has been created based on certain analytics. Again, 3 clicks for states where stamp duty is digitized, and at this point only UP. But hopefully some other states, including West Bengal, will digitize the stamp duty, and then we can make, without documentation, end-to-end loans possible. So this is the future, ladies and gentlemen. Unless we go digital, unless we have technology permeating everywhere, the power of analytics, the power of hyper-personalization, or the power of one, the customer today is very choosy and very impatient. They are used to now GPay, they're used to Netflix, their personal choice as YouTube. They want to see the same videos they want to see, and they want the same thing from the bank. If the customer has browsed to a particular product, he wants only that product and he doesn't want anything else to be seen. So we got to shape up, and unless we do that, this will be going to be a difficult time. So I would stop at this point of time. Maybe in the question and answer sessions, Dr. Basu or some of you may have more questions, and I'm happy to answer any which are there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ashwini Kumar Tiwari. So we do understand, the rules of the game have changed. Last 2 years been how our lives have changed, our way we work have changed. So rules have to be all rewritten, and they are getting rewritten in different ways. And I don't think it is, and we don't all think that it is stopped at this moment. It's all ongoing. We still have to go a long way. We know, I just want to just kind of read out certain part of the notes, which is here. It has not even, the pandemic has not even ripped apart our families and snatched away our livelihoods. Some of the strongest sectors have taken the biggest hits. We know all that. The number of Indian, we know that the tens and millions of people are left unemployed. We know that not only in the unorganized sector, but also disguised unemployment is happening. So mobility of labor, commodities across markets is still uncertain. In such a scenario, the focus for us is to get the jobs back as soon as possible, right? And in rapid adoption of technology, as Mr. Tiwari was also saying, as an immediate result of the pandemic, has made many old skills and jobs redundant. So we know that new things have to come out. But at the same time, we also know that the number of poor in India, which is which has more than doubled to 134 million from 60 million in just a year back due to the pandemic-induced recession. At the same breath, I can also say that half of India's physical and financial assets belong to the richest 10% of its people, while the bottom 50% of the population owns less than 10% of their assets. So the distribution of wealth, we have to do a lot of work. Those things also have changed. We have more poor and we have riches with more assets. But in spite of all that, we know that India is a $5 trillion economy. That's our ambition. And all ambitions, I know, and we all know, are great things to do for us in the business agenda. Aspirations do make businesses, and businesses do make people get their jobs back. With that, hope and ambition that we'll get back to the great days in the years to come, I would now request Sanjeev Krishan, the India PwC head, to talk about your thoughts currently on. We know that you are privy to a lot of information inputs on M&As, Sanjeev. So we would like to hear about something on those. Your thoughts on digitization, how digitization and technologies bring about the new rules of the game for us in the business, and of course innovation. We know that Mr. Tiwari was talking about the startups. We are the world's, I think, the capital of startups today. But your thought on innovation, how those will take us through in fulfilling our business agenda. Over to you, Sanjeev.
Thank you, Mr. Bose, and good afternoon, everyone. And it's a pleasure to be here and to be able to talk to all of you. My apologies, I couldn't do this in person, so I'm sitting here in my office in Bombay as I do this. So, just on some of the topics that we are discussing, and we're talking about India at 75 and India beyond 75. Let me just start off from where Mr. Tiwari left, and I was listening also to what Mr. Jindal was saying and his perspectives. As we come out of the pandemic, the way we look at the recovery, if I may call it so, we are looking at what may be a K-shaped recovery. Now, Ms. Bose was just talking about it, about how the wealth is getting concentrated in India. And if you look at it more broadly, in a K-shaped recovery, what possibly is happening is that the stronger continue to become stronger, and those who are not so well continue to sort of stare at the barrel, so to speak. Or at best, they're looking at a lost opportunity for themselves. Particularly if you look at our mid-corporate sector, they are seemingly focusing on how they could make up for the last 18 months, which they have lost. And obviously, their competition, which comes from, let's say, the more consolidated businesses, have continued to become stronger. Now, this is not a phenomenon which has come in purely because of the pandemic. I mean, even before, things like GST, demonetization, and others have caused this consolidation to happen. And that's something which is a reality today. So when we look at India beyond 75, I mean, what are the 3 or 4 things which stand out? We also have and as was being said just now, in the post-pandemic world, and as a new generation sort of embraces India and sort of, they're supposed to be, they will run India in times to come. How does this setup cater to them and make sure that we sort of give it to them in their hands to sort of run the future of the country? We are talking about a $5 trillion economy. We are all aspirational for that. But what are the 3 or 4 areas? So let me just try and highlight those from our perspective as we see. I think the first and foremost is, and I want to get the focus of the House on the broader sustainability agenda. I think the first and foremost thing that we keep hearing very, very often. I can tell you, when we do a people survey within the organization, one of the things which we get rated very highly is the fact that we are a firm with a purpose, and that purpose includes to build trust in society. One of the main agendas there is to build trust in society. Now, how do you build trust in society? When you take care of the wider stakeholders. And today, when we talk about society at large, I think sustainability is one of the huge pieces. It is not specifically about what we keep talking only about the broader environment and the social and the governance pieces, but maybe all of them put together and how they come together for the wider stakeholders, not just for my shareholders, but for the wider stakeholders. I mean, what does it mean for my vendors, my customers, my distribution chain, my supply chain, and indeed, what does it mean for the regulators and the government at large? And I think that's where, I think the focus ought to be in times to come. I do believe that that is a critical area, because what this generation will leave the next generation will determine as to how quickly can we get to beyond the 5 trillion that we are aspiring for. There are issues at this point in time, and we are talking about it all the time. And there are no easy answers. It's not easy to say that we will go green tomorrow. I mean, look at the energy shortages, which are already appearing in Europe and now also in China. And there is already a focus that, can we give away fossil fuels so quickly? So that is one issue which is staring us on our face. We talk about the social divide. We talk about diversity and how diversity can be so impactful and helpful. But how easy it is. How many times have we tried to hire, and how easy it is? And I'm saying this on this floor. How many times have we found it easily to get a women candidate for, let's say, one of our tech businesses? Not easy, right? I mean, and I'm talking diversity in its very bare form here. So I think there are multiple challenges that we need to overcome and make sure that this growth is inclusive. Because inclusive growth is what will determine as to how quickly we as a society are able to manage and meet our aspirations. And I think that's one of the key aspects. The 5 trillion is a number that will happen. It's a question of time as to when that will happen. But the quality of that goalpost is, to me, extremely, extremely critical. And that, to me, is the first and foremost point that I like to make. There are two other aspects which stand out, and maybe then I'll take a quick pause at this point in time. I think when you look at inclusiveness, and they are all related, the second one that I'd like to talk about is that, how do we, in some ways, process and progress entrepreneurship at the micro level? We keep talking about what's happening in urban India, and that's a huge part of India. But really, if you have to look at the microcosm of India, it is not just the urban India. I mean, a lot of it resides in rural India and semi-urban areas. And there, I think one of the big areas of focus ought to be as to how do we support entrepreneurship. I mean, we look at some of the people who are actually anchoring a lot of startups today. They have come from very small towns, and I think that's a case in point. So, what is it that we are able to do to upskill and skill and educate a lot of our population, so that they are, and once they come through those institutions and they are able to come through their secondary levels of education, how do we encourage them? Some of them, not everybody will sort of create a startup, but employability at different levels, their ability and their confidence to be able to generate small employment in their respective villages, towns, etc., will create that employment, which is very, very critical to make sure that we are actually having inclusive growth. So focus on education, focus on social well-being, focus on upskilling, and focus on encouraging and driving entrepreneurship is critical. And it is related, because unless these people are there, how will those supply chains sustain, which are extremely, extremely critical for, let's say, an OEM who is sitting in one of the major towns. So I think that's the second one that I would like to talk about. I think the third one, and we spoke about it briefly. Today, if you look at the way the organizations are, there are some organizations, the bigger ones, which have consolidated, which are actually, which are doing very, very well. I mean, Mr. Tiwari just mentioned that many of them are looking to deleverage or have already deleveraged, and credit growth is a problem. And we'll wait to see as to when the credit cycle revival happens, because people still seem to be a bit uncertain about demand. For them, it is a question of what next. How do I capture the consumer today, which is focusing on digital means, right? I mean, we call it the Amazon effect almost, so to speak. Now, when we talk about that, it is also about innovation. How do I innovate so that I am able to reach my customer quickly? It could be simply about different products. It could be about a differentiated solution, or it could simply be about creating efficiency for myself in the way I connect with my ecosystem, which is my customer and my employees and my supply chain. So innovation in each one of them is something that, which is a huge focus, particularly as far as some of the large organizations go. And let me say, as we have seen in the financial services sector, and we were just talking about it, how some of these is also happening at a micro level, which can actually disrupt some of the more traditional ways of operations, whether it is by way of technology, whether it is used by use of any other mechanisms, which could be the impact of the digitization that we are expecting today. It could be about how the cloud adoption is going and how a new innovation can come out of that. It could simply be about what kind of analytics could be used to drive certain amount of innovation in processes. It need not always relate to a new scientific development. It could also be a process development, and I think that is all part of the broader innovation agenda, which is extremely critical and is not just about business growth, but it is also about preventing disruption and value loss. And the last thing that I would talk about at this point in time, before I pause, is the wider focus on the various threats that we as an organization and businesses would experience. And one of the biggest challenges today, as we move forward, is really our human capital. We spoke about it briefly in the context of inclusive growth, but I think human capital continues to be a huge issue, because with all the changes that are happening because of technology, because of age, and so on and so forth, continuous investment in human capital is another core area which there has to be continued focus. It's not just about the hard infrastructure, about the roads and the ports and the logistics, etc., which is definitely an issue, because we keep talking about labor cost advantage, which gets mitigated by higher infrastructure and logistics costs in India, but there's also about social infrastructure, which is a continuous investment in people and human capital. I will take a pause for now, but look forward to our Q&A session later.
Yeah, thanks, Samir. Thanks for your, there's very, very important points touched upon. And I think you actually, said about education and skill. We in our country, we still haven't rewritten those rules of education too. We know that when we pass out of even the big institutes, we still are not really industry friendly. And we are talking about this education and industry combination for years now, but we still have not been able to really do a very solid kind of changes in our curriculum, so that the focus on skills is more, and then we built on the micro entrepreneurship and startups. In that sense, that that we keep talking about jobs, but we know that how difficult getting jobs are. But we also know that how easy it is to make micro entrepreneurship, and it's very easy for us with such a large market, domestic market. We can actually do with so many new thoughts, and the skills are important. And then you go into the education that our country gives, and I think some amount of work needs to be done there. So we will, I'm sure, with those thoughts, I would like to go to Samir now. Samir, you're part of this huge conglomerate called ITC Limited, and then you are particularly looking into the personal care division. And we would like to know from you that how is FMCG doing? What are the new thoughts happening? How are those that sector changing? It's one of those important sectors in our country and in the business agenda. And how your thoughts, Mani, your thoughts in at ITC as well as for the sector. Over to you, Samir.
Hi, Rupali. Great to be here. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Stefanos, for inviting me. When you look at FMCG and as a percentage to GDP, it's approximately 2%. 1.92% is what FMCG is. And If you were to look at another country which is maybe 10, 15 years ahead of us, look at China, the number is very similar. It's around 1.7, 1.8%. Look at the US, the number is similar. It's around the same thing. So what I'm trying to say in a roundabout manner is that FMCG will do well when the country does well. The prosperity of the country is going to obviously increase consumption, increase the number of categories which are consumed. Now, how does some country like India get prosperous? If you look at it, we are a lot of our people are still dependent on agriculture. 55% of the population is directly or indirectly connected to agri or agri-based industries. But around 20% of the GVA, of the gross value, is created in the sector. So we have to really modernize this part of the economy, whether it is increasing productivity of farmers, whether it is about newer ways of farming, whether it is about supply chains, whether it is about creating food processing, which will do value addition. So a lot of that needs to be done. And the other thing which is very large is we need to create our own brands, because brands are the most efficient way of capturing value. And as a country, if we are able to create more and more brands, it will lead to a lot of prosperity and investments in the country and for the country. So whether it would be supply chains, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's intellectual property, and something which I think both Mr. Tiwari and Mr. Krishnan touched upon, innovation. Innovation, to grow brands, you need innovation, and it engages the intellectual bandwidth of the country in a very positive manner. So we would be able to, we produce a lot of great intellectual capital through the IITs and the IIMs, but we'll be able to engage them so that they can create value for the country. So a lot of work to be done. I think we have come a long way. I think Mr. Tiwari was right, and I was just remembering the Bajaj scooter, which was bought and then sold for usually higher price than what you bought it at. So it was always an asset and not, and you didn't, I think, I don't know how they did depreciation in those days, but usually you tended to have a little more money at the end of it. So I think over to you, Dr. Basu. I think you can take it.
Yeah, thank you, Samir. Thank you. I remember that you also talked about, why don't you share your thoughts on education and health? You're talking about that. Why don't you say those to all of us?
I think it was I was a student in Delhi University, and we used to meet eminent people who used to come and talk to us. And I remember this one talk very, 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 very vividly. There was a gentleman called Mr. L.C. Jain. He was that time an member of the Planning Commission. And he came and gave us this very succinct talk. And, even after 25 years or 30 years, I remember it. He said, if India has to progress, there are two things which need to do well: primary education and primary health. If you have primary health, people will not feel the need to have more children. You will have, and in those days, if you remember, the big concern, it still is, but at that time it was even larger, that population control was a big concern. So one was education, and the second was health, and primary health, because if you are able to channelize our people in the right manner, in the right way, then it would make them more productive and also increase the standard of living. We've always known that, if we could educate one child, we move up a family up a couple of socioeconomic layers, and it's happened in our lifetimes, and we have seen it ourselves. So I think these are two very important things, and it requires, I think, a lot of work from both industry and the government. The government has made a lot of progress, but we need to do a lot more.
Absolutely.
If we have to catch up with the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I belong to the sector of, health sector. So particularly he was talking about health sector and how the pandemic has, again, saying it. We don't think that it has yet ended. There may not be a delay, there may be a delayed third wave, or maybe no third wave as such. But even then, the codification of diseases that we have, the book, COVID-19 will definitely be part of that forever. So it's going to be there for us to endure, endure, learn, and move ahead. So there are questions from. Should we just go ahead with questions? If you have questions in the audience, can we have some way of taking some questions from here? Or Arnob, are you going to give me some more questions, which is coming from the online setup? Okay. Anyone wants to ask any question? Abe, you were.
Thank you, Rupali. This is a question in general for the panelists. One of the challenges in India is the huge workforce, a huge number of people that are joining the workforce, but there's not enough work. When you look at it from an employer's point of view, you don't get the right people. But there's a huge amount of people joining the workforce, and today that's considered a strategic advantage for India, having this very young population. But it can also lead to several social stresses and possibly disturbances if you are not able to gainfully engage them. So I would like the panelists to comment on this situation and what do you think is the right way to deal with this?
Do you have any particular panelist? Should I ask who will, you'll take it up?
I think, yeah, we can start with Mr. Tiwari.
Mr. Tiwari can say. I think it's all on. Yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you for that question. Actually, I consider this as the most important question policy planners, employers, and everybody in India should talk about. Any kind of a training, any kind of education, if it is not linked to unemployment, in my view, it's not going to work, because all the young people who want to join the workforce and are not able to join or not get the quality job. And here we are not even talking about the digitization or the artificial intelligence, which is in a sense already taking away so many good quality white collar jobs. So in my view, one of the things which has been done successfully in many countries, especially Germany, is the fact of apprenticeship. Now we have started the apprenticeship scheme here, but whether it has taken off in a scale which is required in India, I think we have some way to go there. But apprenticeship is one good way for most companies to actually not only skill the candidate, but also actually test and see, and then there's no need for an interview actually. And this is a very common way, not only in Germany where it is industrial apprenticeship, which is more common, but it is a common across the Western world. College graduates are hired as apprenticeships for 3 to 6 months. And in case they do well, they are already trained in the company, and then they are absorbed into the company largely. So I think this is one thing which all industry, all employers must start immediately. Maybe there is a little bit of skilling which might need to be done for the apprenticeships in the beginning, but that should be part of it. There is a government scheme, there is a National Skill Development Corporation, but the industry and the NSDC and various other bodies interface, and they here bodies like BCCI can also play a big role, because your own companies might be needing specialist skills and they may not be finding them at a price they want to. So I think that's one element which we must explore.
Any questions from the audience again? That I'll ask something to Sanjeev. You know, when we sit on we look at the companies when they're running. We are, all of us are running companies. Actually, the way we are operating now has completely changed. It has, many of us are working from home. There are new businesses are coming up. So let's focus on the way we are working. Do you think that the way we are working will continue like this, or half of the people are, 50% coming in? I keep looking at our, our communications from the corporate offices that now, okay, 20% can come and, join the, next is 50% you can come now. Okay, no, nobody is coming into this office, Things like work from home has become a kind of a norm for us. And is there something that something new is happening the way we are running companies and people in our companies? Thoughts from you?
Yeah, no, thanks, Mr. Bose. So I think this is a vexed question, and I think the challenge for most organizations at this point in time is that when do we get some of our people to come back home, to come back to offices, right? I mean, we have been most of us have been sitting and working on computer screens as Samir and I are doing today at this conversation. But I think there are challenges. We talk about building culture. I mean, how do organizations build culture? I mean, largely, and I can say that for myself as I was growing up, the fact that you could come to a workplace and meet people, it could be my seniors, my own compatriots, people that, you would, the wider ecosystem, that sort of, those meetings, the learnings that you get from them, the experiences that you get from them, when you meet your clients in person, when you meet your ecosystem in person, that is what enables you to build a corporate culture. And I think that is something which we are missing in a very, very big way today because of, everything which is so online. I think the second thing to me, which I always, and again, let me just say at the outset that to me, as far as I am concerned, I look at culture as a competitive advantage. So the fact that we're not able to build culture, in a way, we are missing out on a competitive advantage. And some organizations maybe are able to do a better job than others, but it's definitely hard, in particular for services and technology companies. Some of the manufacturing companies, the brick and mortar ones where people necessarily are coming, it's a bit of a different thing. But particularly for services and technology companies, it is being quite hard at this point in time as they grapple with when is a question, and they want the people safe. I think the second one which is happening is, and we've been speaking about it, you would have noticed the huge amount of churn that many organizations are facing at this point, particularly and again on technology areas and services areas. And again, to me, there are two big problems which happen as a result. One is that, when you lose anybody who's vintage in an organization, you lose a lot of experience. Somebody who's made the future plans for the company is not going to be there to execute those plans for the company. And I think that's a big challenge. You're losing a lot of experience. People want to do different things. People want to work for a limited number of hours. I think, the pandemic has challenged us all in a very different way. And I think that creates challenges from a succession standpoint. And the third piece, which I think I do believe, which is challenged, is because of this work from home is, and I alluded to that a little while back, is I think the diversity aspect is going to take a bigger hit subsequent to the to the pandemic, because people are all now realigning their lives, etc. And these are challenges. I do believe that sooner or later, many of us will have to come back and work from home. I suspect it will not be with the same gusto as we possibly visited offices. Maybe it'll be a more hybrid way of working. Maybe people will think of hub and spoke models. But I do believe, for the reasons that I articulated, whether it is culture, whether it is diversity, whether it is a fact that you need to create future leaders and create succession in organizations, some amount of work from office in early part of next year would be absolutely critical.
Yeah, and as if I can just share, the way we operate in our hospitals have changed. We, all our processes, policies, protocols are all been reviewed and all been changed. The way the patients, when they come into a hospital, we have to think of it that the patient who is coming in normally would go into either an outpatient area or would through the emergency or will go to the inpatient areas. But right now we have to have, the entire hospital is divided into 3 zones. They get admitted to an area where there are suspect zones where we find out that whether he's COVID positive or negative. Then we go to a COVID positive area, or if he is positive or goes to the negative area. if he or she is found negative, the whole infrastructure is changed, the processes have changed, the people movement have changed, the lift usages have changed. So a lot of changes have happened, and I see when I sit on some of the boards of some of the companies, I see that even the plant operations and the way the companies operate, the people movement also has been looking into the COVID as part of the process now. So the changes have happened there too, and I think we all are in our ways coping to that change. The important thing is that you cope, you pass on, you cross that, and move to the next. That is what is for us to move on to those aspiration business targets to achieve. So I would, kind of, maybe this is my last question to, to Sameer, that, we also we know that there are so much to do for the society, so much to do for the companies. All our employees, I think, should have to have some thought for the society, because we are still privileged than many others. So your thoughts on sustenance, on social responsibilities, how do you think the future would be India after 75? There are more poor than rich. Is there something more need for the society because of environment issues, because of so many things? So your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, Dr. Basu, I think one of my teachers was I had the privilege of studying in a lot of Jesuit schools and institutions, and I think he told us one thing, and at that point of time when you're students, you don't completely get it, and we heard him, and he did a very clever thing with us. This was on our first term in when we were doing an MBA, and usually that's a time when you're under a lot of pressure. There's a lot of the institution is really you have a lot of exams. There's a lot of things being crammed down and things. So he used to have one paper called the Social Responsibilities of Business, and he gave us an offer saying that I'll excuse your midterms if you agree to go and spend a week in a village and work for an NGO. So we thought, hey, this seems to be a good deal. No exams, and he'll come to grade us, and then a short grade, right? So as students, I think it was very, very clever of him. And we went, and I remember going to this. I still remember a place called Keonjhar in Orissa, and there was a NGO called Pradhan. We went and stayed with them, and in the village we went, there used to be a fire which used to be lit in the middle of the village, which never used to be put out. And we figured out this was done because they could not afford matches, and this was the only way that they could get fire. Or this is the way they should save money. You don't, one thing is that you hear of it. One thing is that you actually realize what poverty meant. They used to grow one crop in a year, so therefore there was a part of the year where they depended on forest produce to feed themselves. So this is an India which normally we wouldn't have ever seen, but it made some kind of an impression on me. And I think what he said was, when you guys grow up and go out, please remember there are these chota log who have left behind, and if you can do something to do for these people, I think that's something we should remember.
Absolutely.
And I think the young people who are now growing up, and whether it is, when I see my children and I see them, they are much more conscious about the environment. They're conscious about plastic usage. They're conscious about sustainability. And I think they're a little more, I think all of us were too busy trying to, make a living or trying to get a job. And that was our primary focus. I think the children growing up now have a little wider perspective of the world. I think the world has also opened up through digital means, through the internet. So they've grown up with a lot more consciousness around them. So they are demanding things of us, and we're seeing this with younger employees. when I spend time with them, once a quarter we have a town hall. A lot of questions come to us saying that what are we doing about these things? And it's important. It's not a question they're asking to make some points. It's important to them. And so we have to change. And ITC has always been, fortunately, I work for a company which has been at the forefront of sustainability. I think the kind of things we have done in terms of livelihoods. The eChopal, if you know, is one of, I think, was the world's first digital intervention. And around 4 million farmers depend on it. We've done a lot of things in water conservation because that also helps. So a lot of things are being done. We are doing a very large initiative on war on waste. So it's great to work in an organization, and we can also channelize our stakeholders and our employees. So we will have a future in which employees are going to ask this question: what are we doing? Are we a kind of company which they, where they would want to work? So forget the legalities of saying that you have to spend 2% on CSR and all that. I think employees are going to be demanding, society is going to be demanding. And even as brands which we sell, I think the question which consumers will also have is that what is your brand doing, and is your brand doing the things in the right manner? Is it a brand I want to associate with? So if there are two brands, with most things, other things being equal, the one with the better reputation is where consumers would gravitate. We're already seeing the first signs of it. I think it's only going to accelerate. So I think it's incumbent on all of us, for if nothing else, it's good business to be looking at sustainability, to be looking at a more inclusive way of growing, because that's the only way which will be important for the country and for society as much.
It's the sentence of the day. I think that's the only way. So we still have two more questions. Can I request both of you to just introduce, and if you have a particular panel, please ask your question.
Yeah. So good afternoon. My name is Vivek Jalan. I'm the chairman of Ease of Doing Business Committee in Bengal Chamber. So my question is to Mr. Tiwari. Sir, you mentioned that you're finding it difficult and you are actually trying to find out ways through which you can fund startups, possibly an equity funding or something. So, sir, I have two questions. One is, what are the various ways which you are looking to do that? Because we have a lot of startups in our chamber. Number two is, are you looking at a third-party certification, or say a chamber of commerce doing its due diligence, where maybe we as a chamber can help you? Like, for example, we give a certificate of origin to the government, certifying what is the origin of the product to the DGFT. So possibly something like that.
Yeah, thank you. So see, equity funding is something which we are already doing through our subsidiary company called Ventures. And you could refer whichever startups are interested. Due diligence from your end would be helpful, because then we don't have to actually check the initial background, at least. The project and the activity, of course, there'll be a mechanism to do that. The struggle what we're having currently is how does bank give a debt funding? Because many startups are not keen to part with a major share of equity right in the beginning, which is what they are forced to do after they used up their own personal funding. So that is where, because the challenge is most of the startups initially are loss making. It is only the potential of the idea which has to be examined and funded against. And the debt financing as it stands today in India is, and various rules around it, are to give it to only profitable companies. Now, unless the company grows, how will the profit come? So we are trying to find a way of doing a debt funding which will not take away the equity or the ownership stake. Having said that, you can refer startups, at least from our subsidiary companies. We'll surely take a look at that.
Wonderful. That's hopefully that answers your question. I have a question from, before I go to you, from Mr. B.B. Chatterjee. So he's writing that our former president, past president, is writing the positives that came about in our lives from COVID disruption. What can we hold on to? Can we hold on to the positives which has come up from the COVID disruption? Who will answer that? I have to decide.
I'll be happy
Okay.
to take that.
Sorry? Samir is, yeah. Okay.
Rupali, I will be happy to take that.
Yeah, please tell us that. Samir, please.
I think COVID was for us and specifically for us was very interesting because we have never grown so fast. We have our percentage to innovation, which is to hover around 3 to 4% of turnover, moved up to 28 to 29%. It was, I think it was that we had rediscovered the way of doing business. I think what happened was that we cut out the redundant and focused on the core. Teams were focused and there was and capacity utilization of people was at its maximum. We were able to very quickly pivot into areas which were more productive. We were able to get our supply chains running. And because we were able to do that with a combination of innovation and people on ground and the inherent strengths which I think ITC has, we were able to do much better than anybody else. And the kind of questions which I think the pandemic has raised for us is that, and I have a slight difference from Mr. Krishnan here, is that it is, I think the impact of the pandemic is still not being felt in terms of what is going to happen to how corporates are going to run. I think we have all worked on a brick and mortar world where everything had to be concentrated physically. I completely understand the trade-off of not having people around you, but there could be a model which is emerging and where talent is mobile. And if you have talent mobility, you can hire the best for your tasks. Yes, you will have to wait. We are working on how do you create the organizational glue to be as strong as what it was before. So that is still a challenge, right? But it has implications in the way, why do I need to go to Bombay to work? Why can't I sit in Nagpur or wherever I was and still do that? My view on diversity is actually the opposite, is that it will lead to two things. I think what has it led to is there's extreme sensitization which has happened to the men in the world that running a home is not a joke because you stayed home and you've seen that. So I think the sensitization from men is of a much higher order. So they are going to demand of their organization that they need to also help out. So, our policies are more women friendly. I think we will have to move to men friendly policies. And so, that's a shift. I think as management, I think that would be, it's thinking which we will have to, and it goes against everything we have been taught up till now, right? So these are things which are emerging, and tomorrow, office space. Do we need very large offices? Maybe 60% of what we have is good enough.
Yeah.
So a lot of other things will start coming into play, and a lot of women may still work. So you find that if there's somebody's a knowledge worker, you say, I don't want that person to come in 30 days out of 30 days in a month. 7 days is good enough. Because, that's what is required. Rest of the time you're pushing paper and, drinking the office coffee. So this is when I want that person to be there. And there could be differential models of employment which are going to emerge.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely hitting the bullseye. I totally agree that there are, yes, I do. I didn't comment on when Sanjeev talked about the diversity bit, but I do think that yes, more women will come into the workforce, and that is necessary to further our ambition. It is necessary to be, both genders, both groups of people need to be part of the business scenario. On a personal bit, Vishuddha, I can say that the good point of COVID pandemic to all of our personal lives, in our personal ways, I think washing hands is extremely important. We do wash our hands much more than we used to do before. I'm not talking about only us, but the whole country, everyone in particular. You know, when we study diarrheal diseases, we know that that 50% of the diarrheal diseases go off if you just wash your hands, and that's it. So you don't need medicines or hospitals. So we know that the habit of, the mask, which is actually preventing, or social distancing for the matter, when you are a little away from other, actually prevents many ways of your personal health will become better. I think that even the concept of that you are reading about diseases, we always say, I used to say that, when you come to a doctor, please do read something about and then come. If you do your whatever, your knowledge is little more, then it's easier for me to explain. So that also has happened. I think people know more about diseases than anything else. In our personal fields, I think in our, the medical field, we have learned that, which I proposed since 2002, from my Harvard days, that every disease, there is a standard treatment guideline and there are pathways. And those standardized care needs to be there for all kinds of hospital, be it private, public, small, big, every type, rural or urban. So COVID showed us that there is standard treatment guideline which can come from ICMR, and then goes to the state departments and to every hospital. So vertical and horizontal. And we did follow the COVID treatment as per the standard treatment guideline. If that has happened for one disease, then the rest 10,000 diseases we can do it. So I think that's also is something which is good from COVID learning. I will have the last question from the third row.
Yeah. My name is Captain Mazumdar. I'm the mentor of the Shipping and Logistics Committee. I have a question for both Dr. Basu as well as Mr. Tiwari. Medical field has definitely improved very much in the cities and the metropolitans and all that. I would like to know, what is the progress of healthcare and medical facilities in our rural areas, rural India? How much of investment is taking place? Are the private sector coming in for investments? The bank, you as a banker, you can guide us a little bit. Are they taking loans and benefit to do something there by the private sector or by the government sector? At the end of the day, we talk about, we know there's a big threat in the world that the entire business is becoming IT oriented. When that happens, more and more people are going to be out of jobs. Now, out of jobs, there are two sectors again. One is the educated class of youngsters who are out of jobs, and other is the uneducated sector of jobs who are people who are out of jobs. Where do they go? How much can you train the uneducated people? Where can you shift them? They are laborers. From laborers, where can you put them? So can you kindly...
So I'll just answer part of the question. Sorry to cut you, but I'll answer part of the question. And of course, Dr. Basu is the authority on health, so I can't really hold forth on that. There is an opportunity. I mean, there's enough negativity around us, but in the case of rural sector, clearly the investments required and the scale at which they are required has not happened. But there is a great opportunity from all the learning around us is in telemedicine area. And we have seen now the kind of equipment which is available for telemedicine and the reports and all, and the platformization which is happening, especially with the digital, Ayush Digital, which has been launched very recently. All of this is going to lead to a revolution, in my view, in the rural areas where a specialist care, at least from a telemedicine perspective, would be available. And the doctors, local doctors could be guided to give that kind of a care, and the testing, etc., can be done. So that's a great opportunity. I do hope industry and the bigger chains will make this happen on a scale which is required.
Absolutely. So I think that's how we'll close the panel. I'll have a chat with you because that's a long answer. I would not try to do it from the days, but I'll do it one-to-one. Thank you all very much and thanks my panelists, Samir, Sanjeev, Ashwini. It's been great to be with all of you and all of you here. Thank you very much for the panel discussion. We will be ambitious and hopeful for the future. I think that's how I would end my panel discussion. Thank you.
Just a minute more, sir. May I request Mr. Debe Mukherjee, the president, and Mr. Abraham Stephanos, the president designate, to please, hand over the mementos to the moderator and the panelists on the dais, and also virtually give it away to the panelists online. The President may request you, sir, to please present the memento to Mr. Tiwari. To Mr. Tiwari. Okay, Dr. Basu.
You're not in the frame. Yes, I can.
And may I request the President designate Mr. Stephanos to please present a memento to Mr. Tiwari. And as before, for Mr. Krishan and Mr. Satpathy, may I just request the President to please unveil both their mementos, and we shall send the same over to your offices, sirs. One the President will unveil, and the other one the President designate shall. Thank you very much, sirs. Thank you, Mr. Krishan. Thank you, Mr. Satpathy, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We move to the last segment